Well, to discuss this, let's go to our panel. I'm joined now from London by Roshan Muhammed Salih. He's an editor of one of Britain's most popular Muslim news websites, 5 Pillars. And in Oxford, we have journalist and writer Shaista Aziz. Thanks both of you for joining us. Shaista, let me begin with you. What do you think of this campaign to free Tariq Ramadan?
Well, I think people are entitled to campaign for whatever they wish to campaign for, but I think it's an interesting campaign because I'm wondering and questioning why there are not campaigns showing solidarity with women, particularly Muslim women, who are brave enough to speak out about the allegations around rape and sexual assault and abuse that they've suffered. I think that the wider issues around Tariq Ramadan's case is precisely this. It's around the silencing of women, it's around the shaming of women, and it goes beyond the case of one professor who happens to be a Muslim man. We're already seeing the the outpouring of stories and allegations that have come forward in the last sort of 12 to 13 days around the aid sector. We know about the Me Too movement. I think all of this fits into the wider issues around patriarchy, around power, how it's wielded, and the impact that it has on women. And in this case, particularly Muslim women, we are silenced, marginalized, and when some of us are able to speak out, we are facing a barrage of criticism from within our communities by many men, some of whom actually think they're doing the right thing. They're trying to protect women. But what I say to those men is silencing women is not protecting women. It's actually allowing abuses to continue, and we have to break that silence.
Okay, so Roshan, is supporting the campaign to free Tariq Ramadan a way of silencing women who could be victims here?
I think it is. I do agree with Shaista that patriarchy exists, in the Muslim world. That's pretty obvious. There are pretty regressive attitudes towards women, which I would argue are cultural attitudes. They don't spring from Islam. But anti-women sentiment, unfortunately, is something that the Muslim world has to combat. But I don't particularly want to kind of mix that up with the Tariq Ramadan case. I think under normal circumstances, we shouldn't even be commenting about the Tariq Ramadan case. We should just let French justice, so-called French justice, take its course. But unfortunately, what we're seeing with his particular case is a campaign of media demonization against him in the French media, which is poisoning the atmosphere around the case, and which means that he can't possibly get a free trial. He's been held for 1 month without formal charge in detention. His family haven't had access to him. He is in very poor health, yet he's being kept under prison conditions where doctors can't take care of him properly. And there also seems to be some, degree of collusion between the witnesses in this case and certain Islamophobes in France. So while I do 100% agree that Muslim women are hard done by, generally, in the Muslim world, I think we can make that statement. I think in this case, Tariq Ramadan deserves our support.
Shaista?
Well, what I say to that is, at the heart of this whole issue around not just Tariq Ramadan, but like I said, sexual violence, allegations of rape, they happen across communities, across races, is this issue of the extra burden that women have to carry. So, for example, when Bill Cosby was accused of rape and other very serious allegations, his victims said, they were black women, they said they had to think long and hard before they came forward to report these cases because they knew that this was going to further add to the vilification of black men. And the same thing is happening around this Tariq Ramadan case, and indeed other men, Muslim men, who have been accused of carrying out this type of violence against women. And so the point here is that women should be allowed to make allegations, to report them to the police. The men who are accused should absolutely have a right to a fair trial. They should not be subjected to trial by media, neither should the women. But the point is that when women do make these allegations, we have to think long and hard, because we know there's Islamophobia out there, we know there's racism out there. Our pain, our stories are then weaponized by the right wing, but they're also weaponized by our own men in our own communities, and indeed many women who also are, the custodians of patriarchy. So I think women should not have to carry all of these burdens. They should simply be allowed to be victims or survivors, and they should be able to seek redress and seek justice without all of this being dumped on them on top of what they've suffered.
Roshan, what makes you so convinced that his treatment by French authorities means it would now be impossible to determine whether he committed rape or not?
Well, Imran, I've lived in France. I speak the language. I know the French mentality. It is a secular fundamentalist country. Their idea of secularism is very harsh. It's not the multiculturalism we see in Britain, for example, and that's why we see lots of French women who have been banned from wearing the headscarf, for example, in schools and at universities. They're actually coming to England, where there is more of a permissive environment. And the French take this concept of laïcité to the nth degree, quite frankly. We have 5 million Muslims in France, sociologically very disadvantaged. We have a surveillance culture. The mosques, the state tries to control the mosques, and at the same time, France is involved in military action in the Muslim world. So we have a very kind of battered community there in France. Now, Tariq Ramadan himself, in Britain, he is considered something of a wet liberal amongst the Muslim community here. He's someone who believes in the West, who believes in Western justice. Whereas in France, he's treated like Osama bin Laden, quite frankly.
But Roshan,
the
all
media
of that,
demonization against him. That's why he can't get a fair trial.
But certainly, all of that doesn't take away from the fact that he might still plausibly have committed rape and that the women aren't lying. Would you agree?
Well, of course, but that's not for you or me to decide.
Can I just come in here, please?
Take its course.
Shaista?
Yeah, I just want to come in here. I mean, I think that conflating all these issues is very, very dangerous. And I think what we need to do is we need to focus on the accusations against the individual. Obviously, at this stage, there are allegations and they need to be investigated. And indeed, that's what's going on. Bringing everything else into this is a very dangerous thing to do. And also, I think, what we're dealing here with is allegations of rape, allegations of sexual violence. There's two sides to the story. The two sides of the story need to be dealt with through the legal process. Simple as that. France is a country where there's endemic racism, endemic Islamophobia. Nobody can deny this. But let's wait for the courts to deal with this case and see what happens. The issue now is that I think there's too much conflation going on. And as we're seeing in other parts of the world, and indeed here in the UK, what's happening is women's stories, women's realities, their allegations are being put on the back burner, and instead there's all this talk about the victimization of men and the way that they're being treated, and this is simply not acceptable.
Roshan, leaked notes came out from the panel of judges. This is what we've got from there. It seems entirely legit. The judges refused bail because, and there are three reasons, to prevent pressure on witnesses or victims, as well as Tariq Ramadan escaping from the national territory, flight risk, and to prevent the renewal of the alleged offenses. So these are serious allegations, violent sexual assault. They don't want to see it happening again. Does that sound fair and reasonable to you?
There should be no leaks from the judge's office. There should be no discussion about this in the French media. I would respectfully disagree with Shaista on one point. French justice does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in a context, and that context cannot be ignored at all. And that's why I don't think he's getting a fair hearing and get a fair trial. Of course, allegations need to be investigated, but they need to be investigated in an atmosphere of calm where justice can be done. And I don't see that happening at the moment. All I see is trial by media. And I think ultimately the people that are demonizing Tariq Ramadan, they're the ones that are conflating issues here. And I think I would say it's quite dangerous to conflate the misogyny and patriarchy which does exist in the Muslim world and the non-Muslim world with a particular case of this man who ultimately has been held for 1 month without formal charge, no access to his family, and his name is being dragged through the mud through the world's media.
Roshan, who do you think is demonizing him? I mean, if you could give me some examples.
Well, Manuel Valls, the former prime minister, for example. I mean, after he was, all these allegations came out, he went on French radio and he was saying that this guy is, he believes in Sharia law. So they're not just focusing on the character of Tariq Ramadan and the allegations. They're making it into an issue about Islam and political Islam. I'm just responding to what's already going on. I don't want to even talk about this on TV. I think justice should take its course. But it's clear that there's a poisonous atmosphere around this trial which negates the possibility of a fair trial. There is no way that Tariq Ramadan can get a fair trial in France.
Shaista, do you still think he can get a fair trial?
Well, I hope he can get a fair trial, because every human being should be entitled to a fair trial, to a robust justice system, and indeed victims and survivors are entitled to the same thing as well. And in relation to what you just said, Roshan, I do agree with you in terms of the poisonous, toxic environment that's been created. But I think this campaign about Free Tariq Ramadan also feeds into this as well. I myself have been contacted by Muslim women who I have a great deal of respect for, who I've known for many years, telling me not to speak about Tariq Ramadan, telling me to stay silent. When I asked them why are they asking me to do that, they said because he's a renowned scholar, he's a good man, he's a decent man. I said, look, a man's decency, a man's academic achievements have got absolutely nothing to do with a man being accused of very serious crimes. And this actually, I think, for me, is what these issues are about.
Okay, that's interesting.
You know, silencing women.
Right, yeah, that's really interesting. So
silencing
let me take that.
Women is at the heart of this.
So let me pose that to Roshan. How much of that could be, and I'm not saying this is you, Roshan, but how much of it could be people having a sense of denial and tribalism because he's a respected scholar, so they're like, listen, our guy can't be a rapist?
I think there is a culture of veneration of scholars in our community, and also these kind of YouTube scholars that have become major stars now. And I think that has gone too far, quite frankly. But I'm old-fashioned, Imran. I believe in the presumption of innocence. I believe that, you know, if you start from the presumption that all men are bastards, that all men are guilty before they've been proven innocent, then, you know, we're all guilty, aren't we? But ultimately, you know, every man, if it's a man or a woman... I don't think anybody starts from
that assumption, Roshan.
Shaista, I'm not saying that you do. I'm just making a general statement. But I would, if it was a woman that was accused of crimes or the sexual harassment or other crimes, you know, alleged crimes, then I would defend them as well. I don't see it as a male-female issue. But at the same time, I do agree with Shaista's general point that the Muslim world, Muslim organizations, you know, we do suffer from, you know, endemic, I wouldn't say hatred against women, but we have anti-woman attitudes, and we need to sort that out. But I just think in this particular case of Tariq Ramadan, we shouldn't conflate all these issues.
Okay, I want to give the final word to Shaista. We're not in the courtroom. We're not sifting through the evidence. Again, this has been thrust into the culture wars, and this is one of the reasons why we're discussing it. Final word, Shaista. How do you want this to play out?
Well, I want it to be played out. I want Tariq Ramadan to have a fair and safe trial. I want him to be treated with dignity and respect in relation to the French justice system, just as I want the women who've accused to be treated in exactly the same way. They should be also given a fair trial. They should be treated with dignity and respect. This issue about potential intimidation of witnesses is a very, very serious issue. And it's something that happens frequently to women when they do make these accusations. We've heard about women being intimidated at Oxfam when they came forward and talked about sexual assault and abuse in a massive international aid organization. So we know this happens across the board. And I just think that we have to be very careful, because we do absolutely know that Islamophobia exists, racism exists, but that is not a reason to dismiss the fact that these allegations are very serious, and the French justice system, if it is accused of treating this man in a way that it shouldn't be treating him, then that is a separate issue to the actual allegations of rape, which cannot be brushed under the carpet. And I think, as you know, the Muslim community in particular needs to wake up to these serious allegations, and they need to support the victims and survivors to speak up, because that's the only way that we're going to create a safe society for men and women.
Okay. Unfortunately, I've got to move on, but it's been really good talking to both of you, Shaista Aziz and Roshan Muhammed Salih.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.